The Ukrainian general is applauding Defense Minister Bill Blair's recent comments about the Russian invasion. Mr. Blair said on Monday in Washington that allies were talking about what it will take to get victory for Ukraine in the war. Mr. Blair's comments differ from the government's long-standing promise to support Ukraine, quote, for as long as it takes. However, Ukrainian officials say their needs are urgent in the face of a Russian offensive in the northeast, and the Western partners are vowing to expedite deliveries for military hardware. At a meeting in Brussels, NATO Military Committee Chair Rob Bauer urged senior officers from the 32-nation alliance to send more arms and ammunition to Ukraine, even if that means ignoring weapons stock guidelines. He said that if faced with a choice between meeting the NATO capability target or supporting Ukraine, they should support Ukraine because stocks can be replenished, but lives lost are lost forever. Columnist Adam Zivo joined us from Odessa, Ukraine, for the latest on Ukraine's war efforts.
Well, there's a sense of optimism in Ukraine now that the United States has finally decided to send weapons after starving Ukraine of aid for 6 months. But at the same time, some people wonder if this is too little and too late. We have to keep in mind that the 6 month gap in military assistance was crippling for the Ukrainians. They had to ration their ammunition. Their artillery was firing at 1/10 of the rate that the Russians were firing. And as a result, they lost several key cities in the southeast, which allowed the Russians to launch a new offensive in the Kharkiv region in an attempt to try to retake Kharkiv, which is the second largest city in Ukraine, a city that once had 1.5 million people. A counteroffensive against Kharkiv would have been unthinkable just a year ago. The Kharkiv region, was basically liberated in the beginning of, well, in the middle of 2022. So we're starting to see some losses, but at the same time, we hope that this new military assistance will prevent that and maybe allow for an eventual reversal in 2025. Now, another piece which is very important to discuss is the importance of anti-air defense systems. So without US aid, the Ukrainians basically ran out of missiles to shoot down drones and Russian missiles. And that had devastating effects on the country's critical infrastructure. So Russia spent several months targeting key energy facilities and crippling Ukraine's ability to power its cities and its population. Now, the Ukrainians are used to this and are very good at repairing their critical infrastructure, which means that major cities, for the most part, have power, which with Kharkiv being a bit of an exception. But at the same time, that can only go so far. So as of now, major Ukrainian cities are beginning to see some blackouts again, something which hasn't happened in a while. In Odessa, where I just arrived today, there was a blackout, in my neighborhood just earlier this morning. In Odessa, and we use as a case study, it used to be that they would send missiles and drone strikes, which would come maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. Now they send them multiple times a week, and they hit much more often. So I think the overall feeling right now is a sense of anxiety, a sense of disappointment with Western weakness, a sense of optimism now that the taps have turned back on, and a sense of resilience because everyone in this country knows what's at stake. They all know what happens to the areas that are under occupation. There were just some news reports that came out earlier today talking about how civilians are being executed in the newly reoccupied parts of Kharkiv. So they're going to keep on fighting as long as they can, as long as they have Western weapons. I really can't stress enough how unthinkable it would have been a year ago for the Russians to launch another counteroffensive in Kharkiv. And it seems as if the Kharkiv region was slightly underdefended because the Ukrainians were so focused on the south and east. So the fact that the Russians were able to establish some kind of buffer zone within Ukrainian territory is deeply concerning, especially if that buffer zone gets close enough to the city of Kharkiv that the Russians can start shelling the city again. Because we have to remember that, yes, missiles and drones are devastating, but there are far fewer of them than artillery shells. And if a city is within shelling range, then it's in danger. So Ukraine's second largest city is at risk again.